this last of our State of the Field sessions for today. And this one is on the field of network leadership development, which I think is one of the most important competencies and practices that have emerged within the field of transformations and systems work over the last 20 years or so. The recognition of the importance of networks as mechanisms, as platforms for doing the kind of work we do as transformations practitioners has burgeoned, and as well the recognition that this is something that we can be better at, something that we need practice in, and we could use the service of experts in helping us become better network leaders. And a group of people, some of whom are on this call, have emerged to provide that expertise and to people who are seeking to develop networks, systems change networks. So we are here to discuss this field, this emerging field, and share what we've learned as practitioners in the field, as systems leadership practitioners, and explore opportunities for collaboration. This session is done in partnership with the FIDO Network. And the FIDO Network is a recent creation, a network indeed in itself, a network that was created to enable and better, I guess you could say, enable the creation of more powerful, lasting networks, both in their design, management, and facilitation. Brenda Johnson, the creator of the FIDO Network, was going to be here with us, but has a new addition to his family, I believe a week ago. And so has wisely chosen to be with his new baby. So I'm Bruce Goldstein. I'm the network lead, I guess you could say, also called the lead weaver. Weaver is a network term of the transformations community. I'm delighted to be here with you and discuss with these experts these core themes about network leadership and design, collective impact, building capacity for systems change initiatives, and all the other critical dimensions of systems change networks. So let's go down to the next slide. So this is just general instructions to how to participate effectively on the Hoover platform. You may have seen it before. Just run your eyes over it. Next slide. We want to actively use chat because since we are using a webinar for this, since we wanted to make it publicly available, we couldn't use it with, do the Hoover app and its breakout capacity. So by creating a webinar, we have unfortunately lost the ability to do breakouts. So we want to use the chat function very heavily. So I suggest you consider putting in chat your thoughts as they emerge. What key insights are occurring to you? What next steps are needed? What questions do you have for the panelists? What invitations to collaborate? What resources would you like to share? Put it all in chat and we'll keep a close eye on it and make sure that your ideas are incorporated into the discussion. And so next slide. So why don't we start by having everyone who is online introduce themselves in chat. So we'd like to hear from you. Tell us who you are, your name, and where you're from, whether that's a watershed or bioregion or country you pick. And share your thoughts on this question. What does network leadership mean? So we'll take a moment and give everyone an opportunity to put that into chat. While people are typing away, I think I'll just run through the remaining slides just as a preview, since we're not going to be using these slides. So we're going to have a panel discussion following this introduction. I'm going to ask the panelists a few questions to introduce themselves and their practice. And then that's going to be the extent of it. We're going to have a great discussion. We're going to reflect on what we've learned. And we're going to go have dinner, at least if you're in my time zone. I'm in Prague here. As many of you know, this conference has 3 different locations. We are in Prague, we are in Sydney, and we are going to be in Maine, in Portland, Maine next week. We are also, of course, online, which is today is our online only day, and really excited about making this set of offerings available to you. It's really within our ethos to create more accessibility globally to our conference offerings, and that's what this online conference is all about. So welcome. So yeah, why don't we quit out of that? And why don't we begin? So let's see, let's take a look at the chat, see what we got there. Welcome, Lindsay Campbell from New York City. Bruce Hall, good friend and colleague and mentor, if you don't mind me saying so, from Virginia. Pablo Vidiara, if I got that right, from Madrid. Thanks for joining us, Pablo. No, she's on the panel. Paloma Bernal, great to see you all. Chris Thompson from Cleveland, thanks for joining us. So let us advance to our questions to our panel. First, let me introduce our panel. We have, I can't see, so I'm gonna say, who are our panelists tonight? Can you see? I know we have 2 missing. Thomas?
Adrian is missing, and Brendan, and I think the other one was a collaborator with Sina, right? Kirsten.
Right. Okay. Good. Then everyone is here because we weren't expecting Brendan. And Adrian was kindly offered to help facilitate, but I took the reins. So Liz Weaver is here. She is the co-CEO of Tamarack Institute, which promotes strategic interconnected practices, including collective impact and collaborative leadership, community engagement, community innovation, and community impact evaluation. She leads the Tamarack Learning Center, which is focused on advancing community change leadership. So welcome, Liz. I think maybe instead of just running through the whole list, why don't I stop there and ask you our first set of questions, Liz, which is just to share with us in an open-ended way, what does network leadership mean to you? And how did you come to network leadership development as a practice of yours? And what is at the core of this practice of network leadership development?
Thanks, Bruce, and hi, everybody. I apologize for being on my phone. My technology crashed a minute ago just before coming on the line, so I apologize if I'm smaller on your screen than I need be, and you're seeing my messy bookshelf behind me. Yeah, it's really interesting. So Tamarack has always operated as a network of community change makers, and we work with about 400 communities across Canada and the United States in really trying to advance 4 specific focus areas: ending poverty in Canada, building youth futures, navigating climate and transitions, and building communities of belonging. So, you know, from over the last 20 years, we really not only played a role as a bit of a field catalyst of these various networks, but we've also looked to others who are doing network-based work in the field. So many of the others on the call, on the panel, are leading lights that we look to, and we also try to contribute to kind of our own understanding of what it means to be part of a network, to facilitate a network, to catalyze a network, to understand the impact of this network of actors coming together and trying to work differently to scale population level change. And so, you know, at Tamarack, we've really been, for the last 20 years, thinking about this. We might not necessarily always use the language of network, but it is very much the driver behind the work that we're doing at Tamarack. And I think for us, when we think about networks, we think about cross-sectoral networks, right? So that are often place-based, mostly place-based, and really include cross-sectoral actors, including individuals who are most impacted by the problem that that group of actors is trying to solve for, right? So for example, in ending poverty, you can't do the work without including people with the lived and living experience of poverty at the center and in the conversation, and often leading the conversation, and then bringing the allies around the work, and each of the actors understanding their unique leverage points to move action forward or move impact forward. So that's kind of how we enter into the space of networks and supporting networks. We also think about the catalytic function of networks in terms of scaling to population and systems that will change. And I know we're going to get into more of that during the course of the conversation, so I'm going to stop there, but that's also something that we are particularly interested in. And one example of that is when we started the work of ending poverty in Canada 20 years ago, poverty was at 17%. And despite increased inflationary rates that we're all experiencing globally, it's now at 7% in Canada. So we have seen this collective action have a population level impact, it trending in the right direction.
Excellent. Thanks, Liz. So if anyone has any questions or observations for Liz, please put them in chat. And we'll move on to our next panelist, that is Russ Gaskin, the managing member of Co-Creative, a consultancy that's developed over 55 impact networks across the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and that helps others to learn to build and support effective systems change networks. So Russ, I'll just repeat the question one more time. What does network leadership mean to you? How did you come to network leadership development practice? And what is at the core of your practice? Take it away.
Thanks, Bruce. Network leadership to me. So when we started doing training with Co-Creative a number of years ago, we did an exercise, and we've done it a few times since in some trainings, but we put up two flip charts on the wall, and one would say program mind, and the other said network mind. And we basically asked everyone, what are the attributes, behaviors, etc., of these two different minds? Program mind being, we're going to plan things, we're going to execute, certain people are going to decide what needs to be done, etc., right? And network mind was the newer thing. It's less new now than when we started doing the training, but people would generate all kinds of interesting things like we decide together, we have to see the system together, we focus on holding a space for difference and leveraging that difference in our work together. And so it's not that we were denigrating program mind, lots of good things about it, but it was clear that historically in social change work, program mind has been our dominant mind that we bring to the work. Planned action, certain people deciding what's needed, that kind of thing. And that's still where a lot of the resources go. If you look at like philanthropic dollars, for example, and network mind was this thing that we all had a sense that we needed more of. Maybe we didn't even fully understand it or how it worked or what it meant or how it showed up behaviorally, for example. But that's essentially what we were exploring in our courses. And I came to this because in the early 90s, I started a network of green businesses here in the US, and that became very successful, I guess. And so we were asked to take over management of a couple other, what you could call, now we didn't use the term then, but new economy networks. So one was the Social Investment Forum, which was a trade group of financial institutions and professionals doing values-based investing, and the Fair Trade Federation. And both of these groups were deeply polarized between what I would call the purists and the pragmatists, or in the States, we call them the Berkeley faction and the Wall Street faction. But it's like one group is like, if you're not 100% fair trade, you're not legitimate. And the other group would say, look, if Procter & Gamble converts one line of coffee to fair trade, they're going to benefit more farmers than all of you put together. And I was like, come on, you're both right. Like, what is the fight about? So it was just shocking to me that these people had shared visions of how they thought our trade and investment systems should be, and shared critiques, couldn't even come together and work together effectively because of these kind of false choices. So that's what kind of brought me on my journey. And frankly, I got into network leadership development because I needed it. And then I realized as we got good at it, we realized, boy, we can't do this on our own. All of us need to be developing these skills. Not maybe everyone, but everyone who's involved in these kinds of collaborations needs to be developing the capacity to, I would say, cultivate and hold the spaces in which difference is leveraged toward deeper, more systemic innovation and change. So for us, it really comes down to how do we work with difference and turn it from something we tolerate to something we celebrate and leverage together.
Thanks, Russ. So our next panelist is Nono Sekoto. And Nono is a commercial farmer, an entrepreneur, and an award-winning youth and agriculture advocate, working in South Africa and the region. Nona's work in agriculture leverages her background, which is quite diverse. I'm looking at your bio here. It's all this great stuff. Background in financial services, commercial mixed farming, has worked with a global network of agricultural stakeholders, leads a agribusiness network at the African Leadership Academy, collaborates with Converge Network and small foundations. The word network is all over your bio, so you're in the right place. So Nona, welcome. And just to briefly reiterate, what does network leadership mean to you, and how did you come to network leadership as a practice?
Great, thanks, Bruce. Really excited to be part of this panelist. And I really love talking about this work that, has, evolved to be where it is now. So, and I think for me, how I got into this, it's almost like the passion that I was following was really about being with people. It was about meeting people. How do I help people? How do I connect? And that's really where I started with my career. I mean, even in finance, that's what I was doing. I was engaging people, and connecting and really building relationships in a way that I could find ways to support and learn from others. And so years later, having found myself at African Leadership Academy, running leading a network of young leaders who we're supporting to really find a way to build career paths in agriculture. And so this is also, what's important around doing that is speaking to my experience of having arrived in this sector and seeing all of these great opportunities, but realizing that the core of being able to access a lot of these opportunities was in building networks. And so, it really just opened me up to a whole lot of ways of connecting and engaging with various stakeholders that had diverse backgrounds. But I think what made the leadership part really speak to me, and that's why the work at African Leadership to me is so special, is that I could find myself as a leader, even though I was new in the sector and I was young. And, people were looking up to me already, just as I arrived with my enthusiasm and my excitement about being part of this agricultural sector. So I think what's been interesting, though, is how I understood how to really kind of harness this opportunity that I got to be able to connect with people to kind of impact some kind of change in the sector was when I got introduced to Converge, who put us through this training, which is called the Network Leadership Series. And I think what was exciting about that was for me to see that the things I had been doing on a natural, so kind of connecting with people, sharing, trying to be part of something bigger, actually I could put up skills that will allow me to really be efficient in the way I was actually supporting those in my network. And it's been really exciting to really just work through understanding how do we grow a network? How do we cultivate relationships in a way that people can build trust? How am I collecting data that will allow me to really share with potential supporters and partners and funders the work that is being done in our space. So for me, I think this is really what, as I said, one of the questions you ask is what is at the heart of this work? And for me, it's, as I said, it's just connecting with people and really building on whatever capacity that somebody else has to be able to actually affect change in the long run in our sector. So let me stop there. As you can hear, I got a lot to say.
Yeah, thank you, Nana. I reflect on Russ's concept of network mind, and it sounds to me like you've embodied it and filled in the gaps in our understanding of what that actually means. Thank you. And our last panelist is Kirsten Tebbe, the founder of Collective Mind, which is focused on fostering effective collective action to solve complex problems. Kirsten has 20 years of experience supporting networks and multi-stakeholder collaboration, so she's also in the right place. Welcome, Kristen. So what does network leadership mean to you in your practice? It lies at the core of your practice. When someone asks you, what is that in an elevator, what do you tell them? And how did you come to this practice of network leadership? And what's at the core of this practice?
Great, thanks. Wow, I just want to say first off that the other panelists are so incredible and so many things that they have shared resonate deeply with me. So thank you all for all of your thoughts and comments. So what network leadership development and network leadership is for me is it's somewhat back to what Russ was saying. It really is about a mindset and a skill set and an approach, right? That is non-traditional and is not one that we're taught typically. We have to go out and learn it and figure it out on our own. And that was my experience as well. And that's what brought me into this space. I spent a number of years, about 6.5 years, working for a global network on the staff as a network. Well, now I would call myself, in retrospect, a network manager. Didn't call myself that at the time because I didn't really know what networks were. And I didn't know what my job was. And it sent me on a journey that I continue on today. What is this space of a network? How is this operating environment different? And how do I operate differently within it in order to maximize and catalyze the greatest impact, right? What role can I play? And it really does take, as I learned sometimes very much the hard way, it takes a different skill set, it takes a different mindset, a different approach, right? And so after working for that network for many years, it really, it lit a little fire in me to continue to work with networks, but also to find the other folks out there in the world who were also working with networks, but might feel like I did, pretty isolated, pretty unsupported. I think so much of this work, maybe not as much anymore, but it certainly was a number of years ago when I was working for a network. It is structured and siloed by issue areas, right? And sectors and topics, agriculture or finance, or I worked in education. And you don't cross-cut to see and connect with people that are other network managers, network leaders, network practitioners. There is now a burgeoning space of network practice, but that didn't really exist. It's thanks to the hard work of those here in this space too, right? Liz and Russ and the others who are creating that, right? And that's what one of the things that really drives me, and one of the things that propelled me to start Collective Mind now about 3.5 years ago, was really to try to create this space in which we could create this field of practice, right? And be able to, through our collective improved skills and mindset and approaches, really be able to create more change, right, across all of these cross-cutting issue areas. And so that's what really drives me, is this ability to act in different ways, to think in different ways, approach things in different ways within the network operating environment in order to create more change, right? And create greater impact. So I'm just going to stop right there, but that's why I'm here. And I'm so pleased and honored to be a part of this conversation. So thank you. Thanks,
Kirsten. So first I want to invite everyone to put their questions and comments in chat, and we'll highlight those as we go. And I'm just going to tee up with a question, and I encourage the panelists, once we get started, to just jump right in and keep the conversation going. and I will occasionally jump in myself, but this is not a Q&A. So I guess one thing I'd like to start the conversation with is, this is the transformations community. And so we're focused on sustainability transformations, which are related, obviously, but different from, say, resiliency or adaptation, transitions. Transformations, they're kind of a specific subset of what we might call social change work or systems change work. So could you help me identify what are the core attributes of transformative network leadership? How does that differ from, say, plain old vanilla network leadership? What kind of skills as a network leader do you need to be involved in a transformative initiative? Now that's a really hard question. I don't know the answer to it. But I figure with such a group of experts, I should take the opportunity to ask the hard questions. So I don't know if I should nominate someone to begin, or I think I'll just throw it out there and anyone can jump in.
No, how about you? No looks ready. Or maybe you always look ready.
Yes, I was just about to say, I'm just about to listen, like intently. Gus is about to say something. Let me think. This one is it's a bit of a hard one for me, and the reason it is because, you know, at the heart of wanting to see some sort of transformation is that the reality is it always feels like, doesn't matter how hard you work, you don't see the transformation while you're working. And that concept for me has been probably what I've been struggling with. It's like, how much am I supposed to do to be able to see the transformation that I want to see? And of course, focusing on agriculture specifically, the transformation was about how do we see young people coming into the sector, transforming the sector and seeing them in a different way, because we believe that they really are the ones who are going to transform the sector. But the reality is you need to take a step back. How do we then create the platform that first, you know, for example, showcases, invites them, brings them on? So while you're doing these little pieces of work, it feels like the transformation doesn't happen. So that's kind of my little challenge. And so the way I've kind of resorted to making peace with it is during what has been exciting about formally understanding how to really manage and be a leader in the network is being able to sit and reflect every, let's say, on a quarterly basis, to put together reports, right? Because this is work and I have to report to my funders. But what that has actually become for me has become a time for reflection, where I can actually see the little minute pieces of transformation that are happening in my network. So that's kind of how I feel that's what, you know, this transformation for me makes sense in that way. Otherwise, I would just go crazy. That's what I start with. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thanks, Nana. Russ, Kirsten, Liz, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm just fascinated to hear what you all are going to say. Kristen, you want to go?
That was Liz. Go ahead. Either
Liz.
one of you. I'll wait for both of you.
Liz, please.
So we at Tamarack, we just co-published a paper with colleagues in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and the US. And we really looked at the ideas of equity and place-based approaches as being centered in transformation. And I think this builds on a little bit of what you were talking about, Nona, in terms of, you know, both the short view of transformation and the long view of transformation, right? And the paper for us was really an exploration of, you know, some of those kind of core principles that we think might be helpful when we think about transformation, and equity for us is a really important consideration. It's something that at Tamarack we've, you know, really focused on in our work in terms of, and I know Russ and Kirsten, you also focus on, you know, understanding whose voices are at the table, whose voices are not at the table. And Nona, from what I heard from your introduction, you do that as well in terms of thinking about transformation and in terms of bringing in voices that maybe aren't always included in conversations, right? And how do we shift that kind of collective seeing, that collective imagining, and that collective knowing to actually get to transformation. So the paper explores that as a concept. And then I think the other maybe provocative, maybe not, idea that we put out in this paper is that place can be a prototyping place, right? For transformation. So if you want to transform something and you test it out or you prototype it in place and it is successful, then can you scale it? And then can you scale it in such a way that you get systemic transformation or systems transformation? And so that was another idea that we were exploring in the paper that we just put out there. And we'd love to hear from other people about these two big ideas as ways of looking at systems transformation or looking at the concept of transformation, because we're really trying to ground it in things that we think are important. Transformation is a means to an end. Transforming systems is a means to an end. And so how do we do it effectively, and what's emerging in our thinking about that? And I know, Russ, you have also shared some really great resources around, and on the Co-Creative website have a huge amount of resources around kind of getting to systems transformation.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I'm happy to share links as they come up. One of the problems with producing a lot of resources is I even forget that we have some of these things sometimes. But yeah, I think when it comes to leadership, we did some work with the foundation around reinventing one of their flagship leadership programs around health equity here in the United States. And we had to find the right question for the project. And the question we came up with was, what kind of leadership do we need where to dismantle structural racism in the US health system? And then we had to look at, okay, well, where's structural racism showing up in the US health system? How is it showing up, et cetera? So I don't think we can get to the question of leadership unless we really understand what systems transformation requires. And then from there, I think we could back into leadership. But we think of at least 5 things. One is a requisite goal. Like, we need a goal that fits the complexity and scale of the challenge. Because if you say, oh, we're going to improve grade level reading outcomes in our city, that's not a goal. I could do that tomorrow by tutoring 1 kid, right? That's not a transformational goal. We also need requisite variety. Like, we need a set of stakeholders who represent the different views on the larger system, like that Sufi story of the blind man and the elephant. They can only see it together. Requisite complexity we think of as an analysis that really encompasses the full complexity of the system and what we think needs to shift. And sometimes we find collaborations have analyses that don't really accommodate the real complexity of the problem that they're working on, which means you get basically symptomatic solutions over and over and over, and we're not really fundamentally understanding the dynamics. And then requisite action, a multifaceted solution set. Because people often come into systems change and say, oh, systems change, that you mean policy change. Or, okay, we need to do training. It's like, no, we need market incentives, we need mindset change, we need narrative shifts. Like, there's a whole huge, and I'll share, we have collected like 100 different kinds of systems interventions, whatever is appropriate, right? And then the big one, I think, is a requisite time frame. People go, okay, we're gonna have a couple of meetings and figure out a strategy, and that's going to align global bank lending with the needs of climate change. No, like, we're talking about intergenerational change. So our goal and our collaboration should reflect that long-term work. Of those, I would say in terms of leadership, the number one thing that we center up front is cultivating a shared intent. So the ability to keep working with people, to find a goal, to find a vision that will fuel people through the fear and uncertainty and complexity. To us, that is, if there's one thing about network leadership, it's the ability to find and cultivate and center that powerful transformational goal that's going to keep us together over 20, 30, 40 years.
Thanks, Russ. Kirsten.
So I had a bunch of thoughts and now I have more thoughts because I'm listening to everything you all are sharing. And so a first couple of thoughts. So one is, as it relates to network leadership. So why work in a network, I think is a really important question, right? As opposed to, can we just use a programmatic approach and that type of leadership, or, when do we need to work in a network? And for me, that is when the change we want to create or the transformation that we need to create cannot be achieved unless we work together, right? It's very simple, right? It has to be a network when we can't do it alone, right? And it absolutely requires that sort of collective action and collaboration. That's not always it seems very simple. It's not always as clear as it might seem, but that's really important. And then for me too, is sort of this, I was thinking about, well, so that if that's when we use a network and what a network is for, well, what's the kind of leadership that then is necessary within that space? And I realized that my default thinking about that is that the network leader is a coordinator and a facilitator, right? They are not out in front, the face, etc. They are the servant leader supporting the rest of everybody else that's in that space of the network, right? And for me, that is the critical, if we're talking back to transformation, that's the critical capacity of a network leader, is to be able to create, hold, facilitate, manage a diverse and inclusive space of all the, what we call members, who come into that space to create the change that we're all looking to create together, right? That vision, that shared purpose that we have together. And that ability to, again, create and hold and facilitate and manage that space over time, as Russ was saying too, et cetera, that is incredibly challenging and also invaluable, right? And we don't get to a systems level transformation unless we're able to do that effectively over time. And I think, again, one of the most powerful elements of networks is that they are able, in terms of creating systems change, they are able to match the complexity of the system that we're trying to shift, right? In terms of their potential for diverse members, diverse actions. So then that means that whatever space we're holding and managing is by default a very complex one, a highly complex one, right? And again, that is a really serious skill set and takes time to learn. And I just wanted to, I was struck by some of the questions in the chat, and one of them also around personal transformation and what the sort of internal focus here is when we're thinking about being different. And I think this is really key. And it's key on sort of an interpersonal level of culture and practices and norms and behaviors with one another, but then it's very also key on a personal internal level of, can I be self-reflective? Can I be self-aware? Can I myself be on a journey, a continuous journey of increased self-knowledge in the face of uncertainty and unknowns and complexity and confusion. So, you have to, in my personal experience, you have to also hold that. And that has been really key to working with and engaging with and being a part of networks. So yeah, just wanted to call that out from the list of questions.
I want to add to that, actually taking what I see in the chat. Someone says network leaders are comfortable in a messy middle. That's what it is. They feel energy and inspiration in the mess. and that's you're right. It's not this predictable space. You've got to leave space for emergence. so that you are also not holding too tightly, you know, with your expectations and your want and what your desires are. And you're right, it really is, it's a journey, and you've got to actually, you know, commit internally to be able to be part of that journey. Kristen, you're so right. And I think that's probably where, for me, I'm seeing that probably where the challenge is coming in, where we are now seeing that people who are coming into this space and really not sure of the things we're speaking about will really find it hard to kind of see through some of the work that they have planned to really, you know, incorporate an impact. And I think that's really you know, and thinking of succession and how to bring in others to really support them, so that even if they kind of fall off, that work will continue. So, and I think that's another piece, is that we've got to realize that we are not the center of the network. And how do we build the network itself to be part of those supportive structures that can continue even without us? So that's kind of a big one right now.
No,
Thanks.
what you just said, we are not the network. I think I keep learning that over and over, and I know most people I know keep learning that over and over. And one way that shows up is I'm a network manager, or I'm a facilitator, or whatever. And the network is encountering some kind of roadblock in its work. Maybe it's some internal conflict or whatever. And what we tend to do is we tend to, like, maybe talk to the other facilitators or whatever. We tend to kind of say, we got to figure this out. How are we going to help the network through this or whatever? And that's one of those times when we're taking on the work of the network. Like, yes, there are things we can do to host and shape a conversation about the conflict, but the conflict isn't just ours, it's in the group. So one of the things that we often say now is, whatever is happening in the network that's advancing the work or undermining the work, that is the work. We all want to do big fancy systems change, whatever. But if people are not trusting one another, then that is the work at that point for that network. And we can't solve those things in a closet or in a planning room.
Yeah, I want to segue from that, Russ. I love all that. And I love, Nona, what you were saying too. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I want to segue to what this, Paloma, what your point is in the chat around policymakers and convincing them to be part of networks. You know, I think if we're actually creating a space that is diverse as the issue we're trying to address, right, then it should be obvious that they have a space in the network, right? That there's a place for every kind of profile that also has some sort of role or interest in the issue at hand, right? That maybe isn't always clear. We might have to do work around how we frame, how we together define our goals, our objectives, our activities, our actions, whatever it might be. But ultimately, we must have, in my view, all of the different kinds of profiles in a network that are necessary to achieve that big picture vision of that network. So finding ways on a practical level to do that, to demonstrate the value to those folks, right? To those, in this case, what you're saying, Paloma, policymakers, is really key. But I think there are lots of ways to do it, right? It's the ability to demonstrate that they themselves can get something out of it, new knowledge, new contacts, new whatnot, that they will be able to collaborate and connect with others who are important to them and to their work. But also, again, if we're creating networks because that is the only way forward, right? Because we have to have a network to create the change that we need to see, then that should be able to be demonstrably clear to them as well, right? That we're not going to solve the issue that you're also concerned about if we're not in this space together doing it collaboratively. So I think finding ways to just demonstrate the need and the value to all the different kinds of profiles that you need in your network, in the space of your network, is really, really key. And that I think is an important network leadership task as well.
I want to check. I think, Liz, do you have to jump off at the hour?
Yeah, thanks, Russ. I do. I have to. I unfortunately have a conflict at the top of the hour, so I'll stay in the conversation as long as I can. But I wanted to pick up on Kirsten's point, because I do think there is this big challenge that we have, all of us have, right? We are paid often in our jobs to be problem solvers, and yet network work is different, right? It is about collective problem solving versus kind of what we're paid to do. And so it's really kind of traveling between those two spaces and knowing, I love what you just said, Russ, a couple minutes ago. The work of the problem is the work of the network, right? And so not to drive forward on the solution, but to have the network sit with the problem and problem solve together, which is really counterintuitive to how we, you know, probably live our lives mostly.
Liz, that is a very, very good one. And it's making me think of, I mean, as I said, I am in this space because of my experience. So I arrived in the sector as a young person in agriculture. And so I'm going out using my experience as part of my tools. So, and I'm speaking to young people in the space who are doing that. So sometimes you're right. It's almost like, ooh, how do I balance that? That was my lived experience versus what is possible or what can come out, right? Because that's what you want. You want to hear what else is possible, even if it's not happening. But to be able to allow the network or these members of my network to kind of give me, even myself, a different vision that I can also carry out and not only get stuck on my personal experience. So you hit it on the nail there. And sometimes it really does become conflicting in how you want to do it. So yeah, big work there.
Yeah, no, I love the way you're helping me understand how your own personal experience and how you've been embedded in these opportunities and institutions, and how your own personal growth is related to your emergence as a network leader. And I want to see if I can toss that same frame at the other panelists. How'd you get here? You know, what was there a kind of experience that you had that led to a revelation? This is the kind of work you wanted to do. And when I go and I see, when I look back, Francesca Hector said something along those lines in her question. She said, I'd love to hear what has been the most meaningful interchange or self-development breakthrough that has enabled you to step up as a network leader. So yeah, because we're all so concerned about personal transformations and the relationship between that and systems change. What does that look like for you? Can I pick on somebody here? Let's see, Liz, how about you?
Yeah, I'll go just because then I'll have to jump off. But you know, I think I always had it in my DNA that I believed in the power of community to drive change forward, right? And the fact that we couldn't do it individually, we needed to be in community to make the changes that we envision together. So I think it was always there, but the really formative experience for me is not unlike Nona's, where I was the director of a collective impact effort in my own community trying to end poverty. And there were a couple of aha moments in that. The way that we formed our kind of place-based work was we had 10 government, 10 business leaders, 10 voluntary sector leaders, and 10 people with the lived experience of poverty around our table. And it was to disrupt the conversations, right? So we really took a way of organizing ourselves to be a bit disruptive. But there was a moment that I'm extremely grateful for. One of the lived experience leaders, when I asked them why they were part of this initiative, shared with me that they had lost their community, but they believed in the power of working on something that was bigger than, you know, the advocacy community that they were part of. And I think that that was transformative because it helped me understand that people give up things to be part of other things, right? And there are losses that people experience to be part of something that is maybe a bigger vision or another vision for the community. And we all do that. And so I always came at this thinking, there's so much that people are gaining to be part of this, but in fact, realizing that there is also loss being experienced, just really for me, helped me understand the commitment that other leaders make to transformational work. And that was both humbling, but it was also kind of grounding for me, and really kind of shifted my mindset about both the challenges in transformation, but also the opportunities in transformation. So that was, for me, a very pivotal moment.
Thanks, Liz. Appreciate that story. Russ, Kirsten?
Yeah, for me, actually, I'll context this with 2019, we had a gathering of systems change capacity building organizations in North America, so Mexico, Canada, the US. And before the convening, we did a one-on-one interview with each of the participants. And there were two themes that seemed almost universal in that group. And one was some powerful exposure to marginalization and privilege. And for me, that was when I was very young, probably about 8 years old. My grandmother, who lived in a different city, converted her home into a shelter for people living on the streets. She called it Covenant House. And I started going there in the summers, and she would give me projects like go find all the bottles of liquor that are in the house, or things that a 10-year-old normally wouldn't do. But I got to know the people who lived there, and really was looking at these dominant systems from the outside in a way, and seeing how the economic systems marginalized these folks really systematically, and even the systems of services and support and things like that. And so that was another common thread among people who were doing this kind of work as a profession, which is there was a point of noticing that systems are a thing, that they exist, that they exert this powerful forces on all of our individual choices, and that they're not often functioning very well. But until you notice that, you're not probably primed to get to the point where you say, okay, now how do we change systems? And then what is the role of multi-sector collaboration, networks, whatever? Because I think at the point that you really understand systems, you easily reach the next logical conclusion, which is this is the only sustainable, powerful way to transform systems. There is no other way. But I think that point of noticing the systems in the first place was a really common thread in that group, and it certainly was for me.
Thanks, Russ.
I'll put a link to that report.
Yeah. Kirsten, your organization is network focused. You devoted your life to it. How'd that happen?
Well, I mean, I think it happened out of a very personal reason of this experience that I had working for a network, right? As I sort of mentioned earlier, and started working for this network still pretty early on in my career, and didn't understand that it was different. Didn't understand that networks are a different kind of organization, a different type of organizing model, and it really drove me to, because I'm an overachiever and I like to do my job well, it drove me to figure it out. What am I doing here? And what is this space, and how do I do it better? Because I don't think I'm doing it very well. It's really been kind of a circuitous path. I spent 6.5 years working for this network, and then I thought that this interest in networks was going to take me towards a PhD and various other types of manifestations, and it didn't. It brought me to what now is Collective Mind and this effort to help other people who are like me, not knowing what to do and kind of flailing around a little bit, to figure it out and do it better and realize that they're not alone and isolated. And this field of practice has grown, it has solidified. It is more clear as a field of practice now, even in the last, 5 years, few years. But yeah, it was a very personal drive in many ways. And I was thinking too, this is just a totally different thought. I was thinking back to this, how do you get here? How do you get where you are? And I do think that this idea of looking inward is so critical. And I think just for myself, I've spent a lot of time in therapy, and it's been, and I wave the therapy flag. I think everyone that can should go to therapy. It is a wonderful experience to learn more about yourself and be more self-reflective and aware. But I think that I have more breadth and depth to engage with networks in the ways that are necessary than I did before. I have a greater capacity to connect, to trust, to build relationships, to focus on the things that really matter on the sort of cultural side. You can think about networks kind of intellectually. How do we organize? How do we structure? But they are so relationship based, right? They don't exist without relationships. And so the more that we as individuals working in those spaces can be attuned to ourselves and to others, the better we can be, right? And so that was just a different thought that I was having.
Yeah. Does anyone want to pick up on that? No, I can relate to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're so right, Kirsten. I mean, that inner work, it's just the point that we made earlier is, if you're not aware that that's what you're supposed to do, then, you kind of lost already in your work. And so it's really, really, it's a challenge, when a person who comes in this space with skills that are maybe they're able to tick maybe however many on that JD. But if you don't have these type of skills that are just allowing you to just be yourself and how to connect with others, your job is going to be so much more challenging. And it's interesting because with the work I'm doing with Converge, so we're funded at the AL for Agribusiness Network by a small foundation, and they have supported quite a number of networks in this space. So in the sector, agriculture, rural development, and SME development. So I get to connect with a lot of network coordinators who are working in this space, which is incredible. But what was even more interesting was Converge having kind of supported us to think through and building our skills around being a professional in this space. I'm now sitting as a support for Converge to try to find ways to connect better with our other network coordinators in a way that we can have build shared learnings around our experiences, etc. And so it's a challenging it's challenging work on my time at the moment, especially trying to kind of get everyone to realize these things that are, have you thought about the work about your inner capacity, your inner spirit, and so bringing those discussion into this network has really been interesting, because you've also got to shape it in a way that, we're also inundated and busy. You've still got to shape it in a way and position it in a way that the network coordinator can see that value, for them to prioritize this in their diary, in their busy schedule. And I think that's really where it's a challenge right now to just get that the right get the right message across. Yeah. So and that takes work too. So all the work, as you mentioned, of demonstrating to someone the value and why they should actually come closer to whatever it is you're doing it's an actual skill itself that I'm continuously working on.
Like, we all got to become salespeople at some level, right? One of the things that strikes me, and it goes back to your earlier question, Bruce, about the kind of core competencies or capacities, and I think Nona was just speaking to it, is really, so there's an element of self-awareness. I have to understand myself, my own biases, my own preferences, if I'm going to hold these differences in a group. Otherwise, I just, I'm always biasing the group toward what I want or how I want to do things. So we do a lot of work around polarities, or what we call creative tensions. And there are obvious ones, like, of course, we have to work well with self-interest of the participants and our common work and vision, et cetera. Or in systems change, there's always a tension between early wins and the systemic change strategy. And then you get these people who, some people want to get in the room and rush to action right away, and other people want to take 2 years to learn before we do anything, right? And so I think holding and working with those polarities or tensions in a way that is generative, that we see these differences as strengths, and that we're honoring and holding those tensions together as a network. The ability to help a group do that, I think, is really core, because that's usually where we've seen the failure points. We're embracing analysis to the neglect of action, or whatever comes up in the group, right?
Yeah, thanks, Russ. I have a question that's different from what we've been talking about, in the sense that I want to focus for a moment on the practice of being a leadership consultant, being a leadership expert, being a guide, being a facilitator. Because I think this is sort of a dream job for a lot of people. It's to work with all these exciting and motivated networks to help them achieve their systems change goals. I'm sure if there's young people on the call, they're like, how do I get started in this field? And then how do I hang out a shingle? How do I make it work? How do I find clients? How do I establish a practice? And so I wonder if any of you would be willing to provide some insight on that side of the issue, which is, how do you make a career? How do you make a living, as you say, Russ, in being a systems change professional in this field? Russ,
I'm
maybe I'll
just
start
observing
with you.
that Kirsten, Nono, and I seem to have had similar trajectories. We were all running networks before we started to think that we could consult on running networks.
So it's an interesting one, Bruce. I mean, in my network, I've intentionally actually made it a point that in my young network, I am going to cultivate the thought so that they're aware of this profession. Because I think for me, it's really being aware of it first. And so some of the work that I've been doing is in having identified that some of my network coordinators are so inundated and they need support. I then decided one of the opportunities that we actually create in our network is opening up internship opportunities for our young leaders to be part of, what's the real world. And so I've opened up opportunities with these networks. And for me, that's really what we need to start doing, planting seeds around youngsters really seeing, being part of, and learning about it first. And then kind of, because the reality is we didn't plan to be here. And we kind of got exposed in different ways. So for them, I feel we can kind of, what's the word? Excuse me, English sometimes. Shorten that trajectory for them to actually be part of networks in a way that they can see themselves as managers from the get-go, So that's kind of the work that I'm doing, and it's my little passion work, I guess. But just to also try and advance the practice and the ecosystem at the moment, especially in South Africa. I don't have a very big pool of other network coordinators. The people I'm connecting with are off around the continent or even globally. I mean, you look at, where we are here. And so for me, it's really the point of exposure first, and actually seeing how we plant the seeds in the network that I'm working with. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that from both of you. And I think, I'm thinking about it in terms of the experience to try to have out there in the world. And of course, it can be broad and dabbling in a lot of different experiences. It can be deep, having a long-term experience doing one specific thing. It can be a combination of something therein. but I think that that's very useful. And on my own path, I mean, having many years with one network in various roles, doing that really hands-on work was hugely helpful. And then over the last number of years of working with dozens and dozens of networks, that's also been hugely helpful, right? And I just have learned so much. So everybody has their own path. There are lots of ways to kind of build your skills and knowledge. And I think there's something else too around, this is a really multidisciplinary space. There is no singular skill set. There are many skills, right? You have to be able to do lots of things, ideally. And so trying to see for yourself which of those within that really multidisciplinary space, which of those disciplines, which of those skill sets are the most applicable to you, the ones that you are best at or most interested in, how to sort of place yourself within all of this, and also thereby be able to work on the things that feel the best for you, right? So yeah, the multidisciplinary nature of this, I think, is really key as well, when you're thinking about the role that you can play in this space.
Yeah, just note your comment, Russ, that that there is a field, and there was always network practice, right? Going back thousands of years, maybe millions of years. I don't know, the beginning of human living in small bands. But in terms of a professionalization of it, this sort of creation of courses and advisory services, and in my world, classes on networks in a public administration program or a planning program, is sort of I think a very positive development in a modern world, in a Western society, to have these practices become institutionalized and widespread instead of just having to figure it out as you go or adopt them on the fly. And Russ, go ahead, Kristen, you got your finger up.
Sorry, I want to jump in on that because I have somewhat mixed feelings about this. So obviously in the work that I'm doing, we're trying to build this field of practice. We're trying to create more opportunities for learning and training and professional development and all of those things. At the same time, in actually the experience I had in the network that I worked for. So that network itself, among different activities and work streams that it had, one of them was to professionalize this space it was the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies. So it was trying to professionalize the skills and the approach of those people that were going out as humanitarians to deliver education services and respond to disasters and conflicts. And there's huge benefit to that. And that network developed standards and they did trainings and they did all of this work to really professionalize the field. And on some level, that's great. But I think there is a risk of being exclusive and exclusionary, right? Who has access to training? Who has access to learning? Who has access to these fields then? Because in that experience, it went from a very kind of ad hoc, anybody who felt passionate about going out into the middle of some disaster or conflict and working on those projects it went from that to, you need to have a master's degree in that field to even get an entry-level job to do something maybe on the ground, probably not. Right? It just changed so much. And I think so it's wonderful. And also there are risks, and we have to be careful that we're not being exclusionary and exclusive in this professionalization of the field, because there are risks there, and whose voices are the dominant ones and whose practice is the practice. It's just, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think we should keep it in mind.
Yeah, Russ is someone who's been there along, throughout the development of the field. How does that land with you, and what can we do, and what do you do to confront that risk?
Well, first, I'm just happy that we have a thing we can call a field, because I have to say, when I started this and there didn't seem to be a field, I was really depressed. I was like, what the hell are you doing, Russ? This isn't going to work. People don't need this. They don't even know what it is, right? So that's really nice. But I'm really sitting with what Kirsten was saying, because I do think what we're seeing is, when you see a lot of practice development and expertise in, for example, the US or even New Zealand or whatever, what you're seeing are symptoms of an economic system and a philanthropic system that could support that kind of time and capacity, et cetera. When we were doing the interviews for the Signal report, which I shared earlier, one of the system leaders that we interviewed in Africa said, networking, that was invented in Africa. Like, you know, and whether you think that's objectively true or not, there is a lot of truth in it. And yet, when you look at the fact that 90% of development money going into Kenya is going to expat-run organizations, and the vast majority of that is going to defined programs and initiatives, not to the space to convene and collaborate in networks. You're just seeing the effects of chronic undercapitalization, which, when it comes to networks and systems change work, we see globally, but it's much more intensively undercapitalized in certain parts of the world, for sure.
So I'd like to come in there. That's good points. I think Russ and Kristen, the way you are kind of orientating us to the profession, kind of seeing the risks, and also I think what exclusion could obviously have a potential of doing is really blocking out people who really can do this work really well. Because, as we said, a lot of other skills you can learn, but some things are in you, and it's kind of only you can really kind of be part of the network and get it working, if you know what I mean. So it's not like someone can come and teach you exactly how to operate. And I think that's where the risk that I see. And but the part that I'm seeing about professionalizing this work has come in. So because we're thinking of the network coordinator or the manager as the center, if we think of the roles, as Kirsten meant, there's so many skills that live within just that space. But what we should be doing is thinking of teams that live in that space, so that, as you're saying, people who are coming in for specific skills where they can actually participate in what the network management leadership is doing as a team, not necessarily as a person. Because if I am, for example, very data-driven, and I'm not really client-facing, I've kind of been hearing about how you would look at a network in terms of the front office, middle office, back office. Those are very different skills required in that space. And so for me, that's kind of how you would showcase this profession, that you can come work in a network, not necessarily having to be all of these like 50 skills, but we've broken them up, and you can kind of find your space in the network. And I think that's kind of something that hasn't been shown very well, because currently they're showing the network leaders as those that are front end, so those that are more intuitive with the network, with people, but that's not the only type of leadership that we should see in the network. And so I think for me, that's the opportunity as well to explore around building a career around this network leadership team, probably, if I can say.
Yeah, and I think it just goes, for me, it just takes me back to this need for networks to be better funded and better resourced, because that kind of team approach is not possible without money, right? Like it's not
without a team.
It is what it is. So so then we're kind of in this cycle, right, of not having the resources, being undercapitalized, as Russ, you were saying, and not being able to do it right in all these
Absolutely.
ways.
No, that's a very good point. I won't lie, that really is a good point. And I think for me, I'm just every time I think of some of the experience that I've had is being able to have access to these interns who've allowed me to actually practice it at a very smaller scale, because this is what we have to project to our funders, to show them. The real work happens when there's an actual team, because one person can't really be relied on all of this work. So yeah, absolutely, Kirsten, that's a ongoing challenge for sure.
Yeah, as we approach our end time, I want to ask questions that relate to the transformations community's desire to support the field. And of course, we're doing this dialogue in collaboration with the FIDO network, which was created specifically to enhance and create community among network leaders, and to enhance the spread of this expertise in ways that we're describing, and make it more accessible to others. So I I guess I would ask the question, how do we support each other? You know, given that we're working in different places, different projects, different firms, and you know, with different clients, what is the nature of support that we could provide to each other that would lift all of our boats, that would establish the field and extend its reach? You know, it's something I'm personally very curious about, because I'd love the transformations community to be involved in providing some of that support. So who would like to jump on that one? No, you're right there.
So yeah, and I often think about this when I'm attending sessions like this, and I'm just like, oh, how does it become realistic? Because it's nice to say stuff that is just not going to happen because of our capacity and whatever else. But I think for me, the thing that I'm hearing directly from Russ and Kirsten, and I really want to see how to make that happen. I've had a call from some of our network members who are like, you know, sometimes there's specific challenges that we're going through, and it'd be great if you can bring like an expert or someone else who's really dealt with this to kind of just give us this great brief around how to kind of deal with stuff. And it sounds like you guys are in the space of doing that. So for me, it would be great for me to kind of get you come and share some of these topics or themes that you can come and discuss with some of our network coordinators. And I would love that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I'm coming back to this idea that I was just speaking about around resources, right? And funding for networks and for this type of work. And I think there is real potential there for collaboration across those of us who are working in this space, broadly speaking, to push for and advocate for in various ways. And we could do more collaborative work to figure out what those various ways could be. But to do more advocacy and pushing for greater funding to networks and these kinds of approaches and this kind of work. It's so minimal. It's really fragmented. We've done some research on this recently on donor funding to networks, and it's just, among other things, there's not enough. And so if we could all together, you know, collectively combine efforts to advocate and really push with funders to improve on that and make greater levels of resources available, I think that would be huge. And I think that would, like, if the idea is to, you know, the rising tide lifts all boats, that is, I think, one very clear way that we could collaborate to raise I'm going to get the metaphor wrong. Lift the tide, raise the tide, whatever, for everybody. Yeah. Lift all the boats.
Yeah, there's definitely a theme around that, because I would 100% agree. And I think, and I know Kristen would probably agree with this, not just more funding to networks and to the field, but more equitably distributed across the field. Because I think even without that, we're already starting to see the beginnings of an explosion of diverse ways of thinking about and doing systems change. They do not look the same for Te Kona Te Raki, the Maori Futures Collective, as they do for Turtle Island Institute, as they do for African Leadership Academy, right? So, and I think that's going to be to the benefit of everyone. Before we jump off here, I'll share a link to the Te Kona Te Raki's framework, Te Kora Koriga. But I think we're just going to be so enriched by that. And if we invest more in it, then we're going to have so much more learning about more holistic ways that embrace other ways of knowing, being, and doing. I think we're already starting to break our addiction to causal loop diagrams. Not that I don't think they're great, but they're not the only way to make sense of a system. And that all means money and where it's flowing and how it's flowing. And I know Kirsten, Collective Mind, Co-Creative, we're all starting to work with funders to not just pressure them or convince them, but to become allies in redirecting funding, because allies work with the network to bring in other funders and to leverage their knowledge and assets as funders. no funder wants to be seen as, oh, I'm just the person who has the money that no one else has. Like, they've got more value than that to contribute. And we've got great example of the global methane convening. The funders participate in the network, and they went out and put together a $250 million fund to support the work. That's something that no one else in that network could make happen. And they were able to do it because they had the relationships, the language, et cetera. So I think funders as allies should be a really key theme in this.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. You know, I hate to end on a dark note, but I see a question from Bruce Hull about the times we live in. He says, how is the work of network leadership being impacted by the rise of political polarization, tribalization, conspiracy theory, fake news, etc.? Does it make the network approach more or less relevant? How do you see that cropping up in your work? I know we passed through the era of multi-stakeholder collaboration as being the solution to all of our political ills, and then the question of the potential of consensus seems to be called into question in the kind of post-truth environment we live in. Is that something that's affected your work?
Everything's just fine here in the US, Bruce.
That's why I'm in Europe. I wouldn't know.
I mean, I don't think those dynamics are lessening people's desire to work in networks. I think if nothing else, it's increasing the desire and creating even more recognition that we have to work together, because these dynamics cannot be countered without collaboration and sort of collective action, right? So I think however they're manifesting, wherever you are, at whatever level you're operating and living and whatnot, working, you're obviously experiencing different things. But I think if nothing else, this is a driver of networks as a response, as an approach, and so yeah, that would be just one thought.
Yeah, I second that, Kristen. And I think it's also around the focus that people I think ultimately we all want to be connected to other people. And this is the work we're doing. So instead of being connected with other people, being about just playing and having fun, and we can actually be connected to also do great things and impact the things that really are important to us. And I think that's kind of what kind of sticks out for me, that people really do want to connect to each other in a meaningful way, and networks are providing a way to do that. And I think that's what I can say there.
Yeah, connectivity is maybe the lack of connectivity is feeding that vicious cycle.
I was just going to suggest to Bruce Hull that, Bruce, that could be your next paper.
I think he's writing a book on the topic, actually.
He did a book on, systems change and collaboration. Yeah. So Bruce, maybe you could put a link to your book. I'm just noticing how many people are participating in this session who should be also on the panel.
Yeah, well, I think that is a great segue, Russ, to note that this is the first day of our online offerings, and we have 3 more days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And there are a succession of panels for folks who are interested in networks that are going to be offered in hybrid in Prague, as well as workshops and other offerings in the online program. So we have, for instance, a look at an assessment, a transformative assessment of the Global Eco-Village Network. It's going to be on Thursday. We have another session on collaborative mapping and visioning. We have a session on Friday. Curtis Ogden and Karen Spiller are going to be here in Prague. Actually, they're staying in that room right now. There's Karen just came out of the door, actually, to talk about their work with Food Systems New England and other work. So I encourage all of you to check out the program. Search it under networks. You'll find an array of offerings and some really exciting practitioners and some folks who are doing this work here in Eastern Europe as well. We really tried to pull as many people into the program with local connections to really highlight the work that's happening here in Eastern Europe. So I want to thank these panelists. That was a great discussion. I mean, this is a fantastic group of people, incredibly insightful, really rich. The time flew by for me, and I appreciate you taking the time. Want to continue our association. The Transformations community would love to continue to work with you and FIDO Network in promoting the practice and expanding people's access to the practice. So we have a publication possibility we can pursue together. We're going to create a summary of this conversation from the transcript, and perhaps we can publish that in the Social Innovations Journal as a commentary without making too heavy a lift of it, and include the comments from the chat. Thank you for everyone for participating actively on that channel as well. And that's the end of the hour, the end of the half hour. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being part of this conversation, and enjoy the remainder of the Transformations Community 23 conference. It's only just begun.
Bruce,
Thanks
thank you for hosting us and doing all the other things you've been doing to get it to this week. It's amazing.
Yeah, thanks,
welcome.
Bruce. This was fun. It was great.
Thanks,
Great
Anna.
meeting you, Russ and Kristen.
This was a
Cheers,
pleasure.
everyone.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, everyone.